three modifications to the code of conduct that we'll be reviewing.
Louder, please.
I'd like to propose three modifications to the code of conduct. We're getting an echo.
Yeah, we're all getting feedback. That's gonna be great. So with that, Mr. Bonagori has amended the code of conduct, or amended the agenda to add a code of conduct. We'll move that to 10.02 if it's approved. Is there a second? Second by Vice President Sexel. Any comments, questions, concerns?
Is there a reason why this isn't just being discussed when we discuss the code of conduct, the presentation? Like, why do you need a separate resolution?
It would, from a process, can I answer?
Sure.
From a process standpoint, when we get to that, you really can't add a resolution then to change anything. Because it's just a presentation of the code of conduct tonight, so if you're gonna make any change, if Mr. Bonagorio's amendment carries, it would have to be tonight, and it would have to be through a resolution, because if we didn't do it that way this evening, moving forward, if he was gonna amend it next month when we vote on the code of conduct at the public hearing, we would have to delay for 30 days.
Okay.
And follow up with another public hearing because the amendment was added that night. So from a timeliness, so we can get the code of conduct, whether this passes or fails, so we can get the code of conduct up and have our public hearing in the second meeting of August, it would have to happen that way.
Thank you.
I hope I explained that well. Anybody else have any questions, comments, or concerns? All right, all those in favor of the agenda as amended, please raise your hands. Any opposed? I missed Todd. Todd, did you have your hand up? All right, that passes 9-0. Thank you, Todd. Sorry, work with me here. All right, moving on to staffing. Can I have somebody move the staffing to the table, please? Moved by Ms. Slyke, seconded by Mr. Maloney. Any comments, questions, concerns on staffing? Seeing none, all those in favor? That passes 9-0. I got Todd, 9-0. Assistant Superintendent Larson.
Thank you very much. This evening, I have the honor of introducing our new House Assistant Principal, Ms. Hannah Webster. Hannah is a dedicated and equity-driven educator with over a decade of experience supporting diverse student populations. She holds a Bachelor's of Science degree in elementary and special education from Roberts Wesleyan College, a Master's of Science in teaching English to speakers of other languages from Nazareth, and a Certificate of Internship in Educational Administration from SUNY Brockport. Hannah began working in Greece Central in January 2022 as an ENL teacher at Greece Olympia. She led the Black Student Union, was a 10th grade advisor, and helped to organize Olympia's first hair show. Beyond the classroom, she has supported summer programs and district ENL initiatives. She earned tenure in Greece in January of 2025 and had previously earned tenure in the RCSD in 2016. Before joining Greece, Hannah spent 9 years as an ENL teacher for RCSD. She also taught second grade at Greece Christian School, where she led events like Bike Safety Day and planned interactive field trips. Hannah is passionate about building relationships, creating safe and inclusive spaces for students, and empowering both learners and staff to reach their full potential. As she steps into this new leadership role, Hannah is committed to continuous learning, uplifting student voice, and partnering with families and staff to foster a school culture rooted in belonging and academic success. Outside of work, she enjoys eating sushi, attending game nights, participating in her local church, and spending time with family and friends. She especially loves to travel and most recently visited Disney World, a place she hopes to return to very soon. We'll talk, Hannah. Hannah is a proud wife of nearly 15 years to her husband, Robbie, and a mom to 2 Greece students, Abigail and Kara, who will attend Odyssey Academy this fall. She is deeply grateful for the love and support of her husband, children, mother, and extended family as she steps into this new role. Congratulations, Hannah.
All right, Hannah, we're going to do some pictures. If you'd like your family to come up first, we'll do a picture with them. Then we'll have we'll do pictures with administration and the 2 leaders at Athena.
Maybe Athena. Oh, it must be Athena. I heard him say RCSD, the Christian School, Olympia. I see. Yeah, that would make sense.
Mr. Smalley and Mr. Fleming, Superintendent Deputy, and Dr. Zappis. Now the two guys with the best hairlines in the place. I'm right there, bud. Thank you, congratulations. All right, moving on to item 2.02. Can I also move the memorandum of agreement attached per the AgSept MOA? Moved by Mr. Maloney, second by Vice President Stotzel. Any comments, questions, concerns on this? Seeing none, all's in favor? That passes 9-0. Moving on to 2.03, the Teamsters Transportation MOA. Can I somebody move that to the table, please? Moved by Ms. Farmer, second by Ms. Like. Any comments, questions, concerns on this? Seeing none, all is in favor? That passes 9-0. Moving on to 4.01, Code of Conduct presentation, Superintendent Smalley.
Good evening. I would like to ask Dr. Baker to please come up, along with our Director of Student Services, Abby Toronto.
All right. Good evening, everyone. So tonight we'll be going over the proposed changes to the 25-26 Code of Conduct that will be going before you in August, at the August 19th board meeting for your vote. So the changes are reviewed annually, and so typically we come over the summer to present these changes. So, and why do we have a code of conduct? It applies to all students, district personnel, parents, and other visitors when they're on our school property, which includes at a school bus or at school functions. And really the purpose is to help us to have a guide in which judgments can be made, because we know that there's a lot of context when we approach student behavior, and so we want to have the best guide in order to help us with those decisions. It also states our beliefs as a district, and so we believe as a district we have to uphold both the safety and culture and climate of our system, and we also have an obligation to teach and to shift behaviors. And so this code of conduct is looking at a balance of that. And so when I was thinking about the presentation tonight, I was thinking about how discipline is kind of like a garden. And so each individual student is sort of like the flower, and we have to be able to water and nurture that garden with sun and water and healthy soil in order to foster a healthy environment. And that includes sort of like the culture of our schools. And every once in a while, there could be a bad behavior that creeps up. There's a weed. We have to pull it out. But that alone won't maintain the healthy garden. It's just pulling out the weeds, right? We have to really make sure we're nurturing the rest of the flowers. It's really healthy relationships and looking at the root cause of some of those behaviors. And so when we think about this, we're really trying to balance all that. We want to intervene with the weeds, but we also need to foster that healthy environment, and it's the balance of both. And because we also know that research shows that suspensions alone do not shift behavior, and that we want to counter that with interventions. And so that really is the last bullet point, is that this code of conduct provides that balance between traditional consequences and interventions that have been shown to shift behavior. So an example of that is that typically we were just doing more traditional consequences, like a 1 day of in-school suspension. And so a student would sit there for a day and they would return to class. And what we're really doing is trying to pair that with some teaching and learning while they're in that space. So they're still removed, but there's some additional structures that get layered on with additional resources while they're in that structure. So the process to develop our code of conduct is that we review and modify it each year, and we bring it forward in the summer. And part of this process that we've done is we always look at our data from the following year to sort of look at trends. And we have seen since COVID, we saw a huge spike right after COVID, and then we have seen that trend go down. And we really attribute that to very targeted practices We spoke to you last year and the year before around pilot work that we've been doing, specifically at Olympia, Odyssey, and Arcadia around restorative practices. And we do believe that those efforts have contributed to the reduction in our overall, not only discipline numbers, but also long-term and short-term suspensions. So I'll turn it over to Abby to talk more about the committee structure.
So our committee meets 4 times each school year, and we have a secondary committee that focuses on the work that goes on in our secondary buildings, and they meet 3 times a year. And our committee really is a comprehensive group that has Board of Education members, district and building administrators, our Director of Safety and Security, teachers, mental health staff, and parents. And then this year, for the first time, we held a session at our Student Summit, and we used the feedback from our students to make some changes to the Code of Conduct based on what they shared during that session. So our goal really was to have a comprehensive group of people in the room so that many voices were heard, so that the changes that we were making, we ensured that we heard from different stakeholders and we weren't just hearing one voice when we made our changes. As a group in 24-25, we reviewed feedback from the Board of Education, from our parents, from our students, and from our building administrators. We reviewed the data and we looked at our highest frequency behaviors and administrative responses to the behaviors. So we looked at the first-time offenses for our top 4 categories. So in our K-12 group, which was our comprehensive main group, we looked at inappropriate physical contact K-12 and disruption K-12. And within our secondary only group, we looked at substance use and skipping. So we tried to make sure we were looking at behaviors that impacted just those secondary groups. And so the question that we asked ourselves was, how could we revise the Code of Conduct to provide more clarity in the definition of and the response to those first-time behaviors? So by breaking those up and having all the different stakeholders in the room, we really were able to parcel out those different behaviors.
So just want to provide one specific example or a couple of specific examples. Skipping as one of those behaviors is a behavior that tends to have a high frequency. Students tend to, sometimes it might be just a couple times where they're spaced out, but there are times where that is something that would be appropriate to be progressive. So when we looked at the data that I mentioned, we were able to see that for first-time offenses only, for students who only had skipping one time the first time, that the outcomes were all over the board, that we ranged from teacher intervention and just speaking to students to an out-of-school suspension. And we looked at the same thing for disruption. We saw that same trend. And so part of that, we looked at the intensity. So not just the frequency for progressive discipline, but also looking at, well, for disruption, it could be extreme for the first time, where that might lead to an out-of-school suspension. Whereas skipping once, would that really be an out-of-school suspension? And so part of this consistency and why it matters in terms of calibrating is to help us make sound decisions that are good and actually will lead to a change of behavior. Because skipping alone is probably reinforcing the behavior that they probably want to leave the school. And so we really want to be conscientious that our interventions are matching the consequences, and that we're ultimately have the goal of reducing behaviors and that they're learning from their mistakes. So before I have Abby go into the actual changes, I just want to provide a little bit of context around what's in the Code of Conduct so that you have more information to kind of guide those changes through. So the first is each of the levels. You'll see a color coding system in our Code of Conduct. Level 1, which is green, is actually classroom managed intervention for behavior. We call them minor referrals or level 1s. And so those are really interventions that the classroom teacher is managing. Level 2 is an administrative response, which could range from a detention, after school, lunch detention, or in-school suspension. And those are usually paired with other interventions such as the learning I mentioned. We call them accountability projects, where they're actually having to learn about something while they're in that in-school suspension. We also have peer mediation and counseling services that take into effect, sort of pairing what might have happened with the actual traditional consequence. And then our level 3A is a short-term suspension. That's anything between 1 to 5 days. And then long-term suspensions are always anything longer than 5 days. And so all of those are paired typically, especially the 3A and the 3B with some other type of intervention. So other examples that we've spoken to the board about previously were peer accountability council, where they go before a jury of their peers for a long-term suspension, and they might have sanctions where they have to participate in community service or in other learning projects that help them to reduce the likelihood that they would get a long-term again. And so that's part of the pairing when we talk about interventions and consequences, and ultimately with the goal, again, of reducing the behaviors. So I equate this to when we think about, specifically with restorative practices, I just want to highlight that because just like with PLCs, when we've talked a lot to the board about PLCs. When we implemented them several years ago, we didn't necessarily take the time and energy to do it with fidelity. We had called a lot of things PLCs at the time. And now we have a reboot with this intentional effort to really try to make sure we're doing it right, and then we have the training and support in order to pull that off. And that's where we have been for the last couple of years with restorative. Several years ago, we ended up calling things restorative that were not restorative. And so now it has sort of like a bad connotation around what it is and what it's not. And so what we really want to be clear around what it is that it's really providing that intervention and support in building relationships to have high accountability and high support. And so what that really entails is needing to do it right with the training and the resources and support in order to actually have this come off, because it's actually easier to suspend. If we have a student not come back for a day or longer, there actually isn't a ton of resources that it takes to do that. It actually takes minimal resources, but to actually intervene takes more resources and time and proper training in order to do that. So I'll have Abby go over some more of the specific changes, but wanted you to have these levels as context around the changes that are being proposed.
So one of the first changes that we looked at as a committee was we looked at skipping. And when we started to dig in, we needed to first look at tardies. So you see all three of them together because we realized that like skipping, like Christine mentioned, tardy also was an issue of frequency. And so by helping buildings to really define what tardy looked like at a level 2 and a level at a level 1 and a level 2, it really helped them to be able to identify when a student was skipping and when a student wasn't. So knowing if a student is present in the building from the time that school starts, if they're 10 minutes late to class, or to know that if you've missed a half a class period, they should write a referral. Being really clear in the language helps teachers to know exactly when a referral should be written. It helps administrators to know that we're holding students accountable consistently to, is this a skipping or is this a tardy? So we really wanted to clarify that language in order to really understand what it meant to skip. And then the second thing the committee did was, because we were looking at frequency and not intensity, we did a progressive discipline model for skipping. And so part of that is listed at the bottom, so you'll see use of progressive discipline model is recommended. And so linked there is a triangle that gives some supports and some recommendations for Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 supports around skipping. And so that was something that I have shared previously with the board around what the recommendations were for that progressive discipline triangle. And so it is a recommendation right now. It's not something that they wanted to put into the code of conduct. It's something the buildings want to try, and the committee will be readdressing next year, assuming hopefully that it is successful. But if it's not, then we'll be able to readdress that as well. Then we looked at disruption, and again, like Christine shared, we looked at intensity, because sometimes the first incident of disruption can be a very intense event, and so it may need a level 3B even on the first time. So we really looked at identifying how to know the difference between a level 2, a level 3A, and a level 3B, and being clear with language so that administrators can easily parcel out, based on an incident that's occurring in the building, which level it should fall under. So the committee parceled out words like moderate intensity, or disruption requiring staff resources and impacting an entire building, versus requiring extensive school and possible community intervention and causing safety concerns and is dangerous versus may be dangerous. So we parceled out a lot of the terms so that it was a lot clearer, where a 3A is, it might be dangerous, where a 3B is, it is dangerous. So being just very clear and intentional in the language, so that when we look at those intense behaviors, you can clearly see which one fits within each level. Some other changes that we made were we added personal electronic devices under our computer and electronic misuse. And that was really just taking what we've already had in practice and putting it into policy because we just had never added personal electronic devices. And that also created a related change on page 10, which says that in grades 6 through 12, electronic devices must be in locked pouches except with permission of principals. So again, that's something that we had already been doing in practice, and we're just officially putting it into the code of conduct. For defiance, insubordination, and noncompliance, this was a recommendation that we took into account from our student session, is that after the pilot at Olympia and Arcadia, there was a lot of confusion around if students failed to comply or refused to comply during the security screenings and searches, and the students felt that they were not clear that that was a violation of the code of conduct, and also staff members felt that they maybe didn't know what category that fell under. So it was kind of a dual conversation in both arenas, and so the students asked that that could be clearer, and staff members asked where did that fit, so the committee spent some time kind of parceling that out, and it felt like it ended up falling within this category, so we added a line within this category to make it clear for students and for staff that would be the appropriate category to use if a student is refusing or if they're failing to comply during those screenings. And then again, looking at the intensity, we looked at inappropriate physical contact was our second category. So we did the same breakdown of levels. And so if you look at the difference between a level 3A and 3B, you'll see words like may result in minor injury versus with the intent to cause significant injury. So again, like your intent is there and it can cause a major disruption to the educational environment is going to be your level 3B. So getting intentional with that wording to help really define what an inappropriate physical contact could look like. And part of that is the intent of the student during those inappropriate physical contact moments. So again, it's different than fighting. It's just those inappropriate physical contacts. So providing some clarity in those top categories. We looked at damage of property, and we added the word causing intentional damage because it just added a lot of clarity around that they were causing the intentional damage. It wasn't just damage that was occurring. And then we also made a change to the definition of bystander, because what a lot of buildings were finding is that our students, we had some students presenting bystander behavior that wasn't just watching incidences occurring. They were actually encouraging students to damage property or to engage in fighting, and we didn't have anything within the code of conduct to address bystander behavior that was encouraging bad behavior. So we really needed to find a place within the code of conduct where we could address those type of behaviors. And so that was, the two kind of went together because of a specific incident when we were doing tabletop drills, so we addressed both at the same time. We looked at in an unauthorized area or out of bounds area, and we added includes trespassing. And then we added the line, this applies to students who are suspended or otherwise unauthorized to be on school property. And this was something that when students are suspended, it's always been within their suspension letters. It's just not something that had been in the code of conduct. So this is, again, a policy versus practice, and in a way for us to be able to be really clear with our students and to be able to hold them accountable. For the next one, we created a secondary category. So SSEC stands for School Safety and Educational Climate Reporting, and it's a New York State category that gets reported directly to New York State. So there is a 3B category that already exists within the Code of Conduct to address weapons at that level. And so an example of that would be there's certain kinds of knives or like lengths of blades of knives that are addressed within that category. We found that students could sometimes bring other weapons in, like they might bring in a letter opener with the intent to hurt a student. And so we weren't able to use that category to address such an incident like that. So we needed to create a category, so we created a 3A category that wasn't an SSEC category, so not reportable to the state. It was one that we could use to address weapons that were coming into the school that didn't fit that higher category. So we're able to still make those, we were still able to address weapons that are coming in that maybe aren't at the level that the state finds as reportable. And then our last one was we have a progressive discipline model to use for use, possession, and sale of drugs. And that was created with our substance abuse prevention department. And it had been created over the course of a year by administrators and teachers in our SAP department. And they actually brought it forth to the committee as a recommendation to look at. So the committee took a look at it. They made some recommendations. They sent it back and forth a few times. And we really settled on a model that we felt like was great to try out for next year. So it has similar wording to skipping, but it looks a little bit different. And so the example that I would give is that, like in the old model, if a student was caught vaping, they may just be given ISS. With our new progressive discipline model, if a student is vaping, they may get, or sorry, they would have gotten OSS. In our new model, they may be given ISS, and then they're going to be given some interventions that are going to address the vaping and their substance use to hopefully stop the behavior and teach them some other coping skills besides vaping. So we're really working to address the substance use issues as well as provide a consequence for the behavior, as opposed to just sending them out of school and then bringing them back in without any sort of intervention. So some other changes that we did was there were some grammatical corrections that were made on pages 10 and 13. Cannabis was added, and that was to be consistent with the New York State legislation verbiage, because they use cannabis with marijuana or in place of marijuana. So we added them together on page 19, 28, 29, 52, and 54. We added click this QR code to the graphic on page 23. And on page 55, we removed the section related to interscholastic athletic eligibility and added the note, for more information, please refer to Board Policy 7421, titled Interscholastic Athletic Eligibility, which is publicly accessible from the district's Board Doc website. And we just did that because it was kind of redundant to have a board policy also listed within the Code of Conduct. And then if changes were made at a different time besides when the Code of Conduct was updated, they were just constantly out of date. So we're just referring them to the policy instead of reprinting the policy. So the next steps for our committee are just to have uniform presentations of the Code of Conduct to be delivered to students and staff at the opening of school, and to convene the 25-26 committee to review our data and collect input and make recommendations for next school year.
And so then again, just as a reminder, the vote is on August 19th. And if there's any questions, you can send them through Sean and Jeremy, who can relay them to us if there's any questions.
Thank you both. So if anybody has any questions on that, make sure you get them to Jeremy and I, and hopefully in the next presentation, Abby and Christine can get those answered or tie it in, so. All right, moving on to 6.01, anticipated bids. It's written information only. Does anybody have any questions on that? So, all right, moving on to item 10.01. Can I have somebody move the following, please? And Mr. Butler, you're going to have to abstain from this vote because you weren't at the hearing. So be it resolved, the Board of Education of the Greece Central School District, having heard an appeal from a superintendent hearing determination made by the superintendent of schools and following due deliberation, hereby upholds the penalty imposed. Can I say move that to the table, please? Moved by Vice President Stencil, seconded by Ms. Like. Any comments, questions, or concerns on this? Seeing none, all those in favor? That passes 8-0. Moving on to 10.02, the amendment to the Code of Conduct. Can I have somebody move that to the table, please? Moved by Mr. Bonagorio, second by Vice President Stetzel. Questions, comments, concerns? I'll let Mr. Bonagorio start since it's his resolution.
Thank you, Mr. President. You had suggested breaking this into three pieces. Should I read each one in turn? Should I read them together so that there's some context?
And then we can separate them, or you can separate them after that.
Okay, great. So there are three passages in the Code of Conduct on page 5 of the document, and I've provided a copy of page 5 with the relevant sections highlighted in blue and in pink. And then an addition that I would like to propose. So I would like to propose three amendments to the code. The first, to remove the first bullet point under the section titled Specific Goals of the Code of Conduct. It's highlighted in pink, and it reads as follows: reduce overuse and disproportionate use of in-school and out-of-school suspensions and school discipline referrals. The second amendment that I'd like to propose is to replace that statement with the following: establish clear expectations of behavioral norms and consequences for infractions for all students and adults on school premises or at school functions, with the intent of holding students and adults accountable for their actions and thereby protecting the safety and academic opportunity of all students and staff. And that is highlighted in yellow at the bottom. I inserted that there. And then finally, the third proposal, to remove the first sentence in item 4 under the section titled Beliefs About Children, Learning, and Discipline. That's highlighted in blue, and it reads as follows: the use of out-of-school suspension as a response to challenging behavior does not improve school climate or outcome for students. I would leave the rest of that section intact, but remove that one sentence. Do you want me to pause there, or I'm not sure. I'll leave it in your hands to guide that.
Okay, so why don't we take them as 3 separate discussion points and vote? I mean, I guess we could kind of tie the yellow and the pink together, because basically the pink's going away and the yellow's going in. So why don't we tie those, if you're good with that, Mr. Baumgartner, if it's not an overstep, we tie those together, since the pink's gonna go away and the yellow's gonna go in its place.
I'm fine with that.
And then we'll do the other one separate, so we'll just have basically 2 resolutions. So on the first resolution, removing the pink and adding the yellow that's before you, does anybody have any comments, questions, concerns? Mrs. Farmer?
Yes, thank you. Mark, we had a brief few minutes to talk about this, so thank you. So when we're talking about holding students and adults accountable for their actions, what does that look like to you in terms of accountability, I guess? I mean, I don't even know how we would do that with adults. Are we talking about law enforcement engagement? How far,
Well-
what does that look like?
Yeah, thank you. I would say that these proposals are extremely modest and are not proposing what those responses are. Those are already, I believe, embedded in the Code of Conduct. So there's no change to that. This is really a verbiage change that I think is important, because, quite frankly, it's called the Code of Conduct. And a Code of Conduct deals with behavior. And the very first bullet point under the section, and this is really the first substantial section of the Code of Conduct, it's 4 paragraphs in to the document. It's titled Specific Goals of the Code of Conduct. And the very first bullet point addresses not conduct, not student behavior, not adult behavior. And by the way, to your question, Mrs. Farmer, the Code of Conduct does apply to students and adults, so there's no change in that. But this one section it makes the presumption that there is overuse, which I would argue is suggesting that our administrators are already kind of violating the spirit of what they should be doing, or not just the spirit, but they're acting inappropriately, maybe even abusively. The statement of disproportionate use. So you're looking at, with regard to overuse and disproportionate use, you're talking about quantities and relative quantities. And in my perspective, when you're talking about responding to inappropriate behaviors, you should be looking at facts. And whether those quantities, numbers of uses or disproportionate uses, those should be driven just by the facts. And any attempt to deal with them kind of superficially to say, well, we can't have that, then you're talking about a violation of justice. Justice is applying the rules to the case at hand. Doesn't mean we shouldn't care about those things, but it doesn't belong here in the Code of Conduct. Code of Conduct is about behavior. If we want to address those, I think we have a lot of other opportunities to do that, and I think they're certainly worth investigating. But I think for that reason alone, that should be stricken and replaced with what really is the purpose of the Code of Conduct. Ms. Baker just stated it on page 2 of her presentation. I think that should be really, in essence, I think having listened to Superintendent Smallene and our cabinet members speaking repeatedly to us, the text that I'm suggesting really comes from what I've heard them say. So that's the rationale for providing that language in place.
I mean, I'm gonna let you follow up, Tracy,
Yeah.
because it was your question. He was responding to you, so if.
So follow-up?
Yep, if you have a follow-up, and then I'll come to Mary.
All right, thanks. So yes, I agree that that first bullet, the pink part, it shouldn't have started there, right? Because all of a sudden, we're looking at this from a deficit in terms of behavior. So if I go down to the second bullet, how is that, and I see that your yellow is a little broader. Why do you want to replace the pink with the yellow? It seems as if these other bullets address all that. And I like how it starts with establish, which is there, establish a school-wide expectations that all adults are committed to support. And you kind of did the same thing, establish clear and consequences for interactions. And then we go down. So, yeah, so what are you thinking in terms of replacing the pink with the yellow? Because I would take the pink out and start with the established school-wide, that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing similarities with what you have said.
Okay.
Is there a redundancy, or is it just?
No, I don't think there is. Actually, there's 10 bullet points that I've counted there, and I don't think there is a single bullet point that clearly refers to establishing norms for student behavior. There's a lot of statements about how we might get to not clearly better student behavior, but providing supports and things like that. But there's no clear statement about establishing clear expectations or behavioral norms for students or adults on school premises or school functions. So I think, really, again, I'm pretty much lifting that from, for example, there's something very close to that on page 4 of the Code of Conduct at the top, kind of as a preamble, or where you might put a quote from Maya Angelou or someone like that. We've seen it pop up. So I think it just needs a clear statement. I'll refer to John Hattie, who, in his work, I want to read a quote from Hattie. This is from Visible Learning. A major message is that poor behavior needs fair, clear, and understood consequences. Consequences matter. The effects of understood consequences are high for reductions in the regular classroom and higher in self-contained special classes. So we really should just point the Code of Conduct at that. That's my
So you see
perspective
this
on it.
as being the overarching?
Yes.
Okay.
This sets a tone. It's the very first bullet point of the goals of the Code of Conduct.
All right. Thank you.
Ms. Lake?
Um,
Microphone.
It's on already.
I just want to make sure.
I don't have Jordan here to turn it on for me.
I know, that's what I'm worried about.
I'm not very good at it either.
I would be very happy to see the first bullet go, because I was in situations teaching where we would be told, we're not doing well in this area, so we need to cut down on referrals. And it wasn't about the behavior of students. It was about that issue. And when we talk about SMART goals, I would like to see more SMART goals for the code of conduct. So we know if it's hitting the mark or not. We know when we look at the interventions, yes, that intervention did work. It worked at this school and it worked for these kids, and how do we modify it? So I think having SMART goals attached to the code of conduct, I do not want it longer, but I think that those are important. And I think that what you wrote says it, says that well.
Thank you, Ms. Lake. Mr. Butler?
Thank you. I could support the first bullet being put like at the end of that list, but I actually think it's a really important element that that the committee that worked on this saw fit to include there, and I feel strongly that it ought to stay. And the reason isn't because I want to see the number of suspensions go down so that the number is lower. It's because there is a wide and deep body of research that shows that suspensions don't improve school climate, they don't lead to behavior change, and in fact, they're predictive of students becoming involved in the juvenile justice system and all kinds of other negative outcomes. So it actually makes it more likely when a student is suspended that they are going to be suspended again and that behavior problems are going to continue. So I think the idea that it is in there is important. We've been cited by New York State for overuse of suspensions. So I think the fact that it says we need to reduce overuse and disproportionate use is, just a fact. The mention that we want to deal in facts, that's a fact. And if we want to deal in facts, then I think that belongs in there. And the code of conduct is a tool to help manage the behaviors that too often are leading to suspensions. And so I think as far as the striking of the first bullet, I could see moving it to later in this section as a specific goal, but I think it should be the goal of the code of conduct to provide the tools, the progressive discipline, and the context framing and training that adults need in order to help students avoid negative behaviors, and as the fifth bullet says, promote positive behaviors, preventing inappropriate, unacceptable, and unskillful behaviors, and support improved behaviors for students. So I think that I think it's really important that that stays, and I agree with where I thought Tracy was going, that I think everything else in that section does talk about, it doesn't use the words behavioral norms, but establishing school-wide expectations is, I think, a trade-out for behavioral norms, and I don't see one as being better than the other. And I appreciate, Mark, you pointing out what's in bold on the even earlier in the book than that, which talks about student behavior and the behavior of students, district personnel, et cetera. So I'm not in support of the first element.
I just want to make sure before I come back to you, Mary. Anybody else have anything? All right, Mary, you're up.
Well, in terms of the research, there's a lot of other research too that says that there is a relationship between students getting in trouble in school and students going to prison. However, they've established a correlation. They have not established a causation. However, when we were looking at literacy and incarcerated juveniles, the number one predictor of recidivism was illiteracy. Not socioeconomic, not racial, not anything else, but literacy. And that was pretty startling for those of us who participated in that. So I think that there's a lot on both sides that we need to look at. in terms of the research, which is why I think if we establish SMART goals, then we decide how we're measuring things, and we can do our own research.
Thank you, Ms. Lake. Mr. Bongario?
I'd like to just respond to Mr. Butler's comments regarding the evidence about suspension. Actually, two points. First, this proposal, none of these proposals are advocating against the use of restorative practices or progressive discipline. I think those are all fine in keeping with it. The purpose of these recommendations are really to keep us focused on the point of the code of conduct, which is about conduct and student behavior, adult behavior. With regard to the evidence on suspensions, 50% of students who are suspended once are not suspended again. There is a very strong deterrent factor. The recurrence, the recidivism of activities that lead to suspension drop basically by half with each event of suspension. So there is a lot of evidence that suspensions do help. That doesn't mean I'm suggesting we should start suspending everyone. No, that should be, I think, down the list. A last resort, maybe, certainly not the first thing you go to unless it's a really egregious offense. But again, that's not what's in view in these proposals. Just let's keep our focus on what is at issue. And I think, really, let's not use this document as a means of trying to push a distortive view of what providing a balanced disciplinary process is. I think Mrs. Baker, Ms. Baker, Dr. Baker, sorry about that, hit on it right at the beginning. This is about balance. So I don't think anything in these proposals opposes that balance.
Mr. Butler, we're back to you.
Thank you. I think according to the research that I've been able to do, I have not been able to find any research that shows that it does have a deterrent effect. In fact, when you Google, does suspension work for students, the first thing that the Google AI assessment of what is published says that it has no deterrent effect. Studies have shown that suspensions do not deter students from future misbehavior and can even increase the likelihood of future disciplinary problems. So I am not an education expert. I do my best as a board member. I think most of the people on the board that would be true about as well. If there are, I do wonder if any of the people who have gone to school for this have the ability to sort of clarify what the research has shown. Am I right that the overwhelming weight of research shows that there is not deterrent effect, that it does increase the risk of future problems? If any of our cabinet members or the superintendent have a comment on that, I'd love to hear them weigh in on what the actual what their years of experience and reading of the research tells about this. So that's I just have not been able to find any research at all that shows that suspension does have a deterrent effect. In fact, quite the contrary, that it has a negative effect on students. And these are studies that don't just look at correlation, but actually look at causation.
I'm going to let Dr. Baker answer, and then I have an amendment that I want to add.
I'm going to have Dr. Zaffis go first, and I'll jump
Oh,
at it.
okay,
Yeah.
sorry. Sorry, Mike.
Just a couple things before Christine speaks. About a year and a half ago, we did a presentation on restorative practices to the board, after which we sent several resources that had to do with both restorative practices and suspensions. And the articles that we base that, our kind of development of this on, do align with what Mr. Butler said about suspensions having a harmful effect on student outcomes, including John Hattie's research from Visible Learning. So the effect size with regards to suspension and student outcomes is actually a negative effect size, where positive 0.4 would be kind of a flat, no effect of the intervention. So those were the couple that I had.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I actually did my dissertation on reducing disproportionality in schools, and restorative practices and other interventions were part of that study. And so that is consistent with what I found when I did my own research.
Thank you both.
And if I could just add one thing, I think the operative word in this part of the code of conduct is the word overuse and disproportionate use. It's not saying we should just flatly reduce the use of suspensions, although it sounds like the research would encourage us to try to do that if we really want to have better outcomes for students. But it is about the overuse and disproportionate use, which I would think that we would all be opposed to overusing something or disproportionately using something.
Thank you, Mr. Butler.
Can I go quick?
Nope, I'm going to make my amendment because we're beating this horse to death, and I think my amendment is going to correct this. Maybe, we'll see. So after adults accountable for their actions, these actions should reduce overuse and disproportionate use of in and out of school suspension, thereby protecting the safety and academic opportunity of all our students and staff. So it gets reincorporated back into with Mark's resolution that with what he proposes, it should reduce the overuse and disproportionate use of in-school and out-of-school suspensions. That's my amendment. Is there a second?
Would you consider a friendly amendment to your amendment?
Maybe. What's your friendly amendment?
So the way you stated it was a causal relationship from the reduction in disproportionalities and overuse to safer environment. I would put it the other way around, that creating a safer environment would reduce the overuse and disproportionalities.
Okay, I'm confused now. So with my amendment that I made, read it to me so I can hear if it's friendly or if it's totally changing what my amendment is.
No, so you ended at, would you read it back to me?
Sure. So I'm adding in, after accountable for their actions, I would like to amend it to say, these actions should reduce the overuse and disproportionate use of in-school and out-of-school suspensions, thereby protecting the safety and academic opportunity for all students and staff.
So my suggestion is basically saying thereby protecting the safety and academic opportunity for all students and staff and reducing overuse and disproportionate use of suspensions.
So you want to move basically to reduce overuse to the end as opposed to where I put it?
Yes.
I can live with that.
Can you please read it as it's being proposed?
Yeah.
Yep.
And is there any way somebody can, when we do this, that somebody can type this up so we can see it as well? Is that I don't know if the technology allows that, but.
So what this would say now is the paragraph that you have in front of you, the yellow paragraph at the end. Read it, Mark.
Beginning with holding adults.
Yep.
Sure.
I just want to make sure we have the right language. Just give me a second to get the right language. Okay, on the amendment?
Establish clear expectations of behavioral norms and consequences for infractions for all students and adults on school premises or at school functions with the intent of holding students and adults accountable for their actions and thereby protecting the safety and academic opportunity of all our students and staff and reducing the overuse and disproportionate use of suspensions.
Okay.
I think that's how you read it.
Yep. Okay. So that's, is that a second on my
I'll second that.
amendment? Okay, so we're on the amendment to the amendment at this point. All right, is there questions on the amendment, to the amendment?
Well,
You want to make a comment, Superintendent Smalling? Fire away. Yep, you're up.
When I read the first bullet, and I actually listened a little bit more to what Dr. Baker and what Abby shared, what they found was an overuse on some level 1 or level 2 instance, that was an overuse because there wasn't clear expectations that's now outlined here. We saw ranges for kids for their first infraction of skipping led to suspensions, right? So now that I read that with what you've put in, that now with clear expectations and clear consequences, which the revisions attempted to do, by doing both of those, so having the clear expectations, having clear consequences for those examples that you had, to the point, what it does now is it should, with those clear expectations, reduce the overuse of suspension. So I think with what you brought in with that idea of being clear and being clear with expectations, it actually, to me, I hear it supporting what came out of the research that you pulled when you looked at referrals. And so we were overusing suspensions for infractions like skipping the first time. Now, we've attempted to be clear with the expectations and clear with the consequences to hopefully reduce the overuse. So to me, that's how I see that now, where there's a combination, I think the point that you were making, because without that piece, it just says basically that the purpose of our code of conduct is simply just to reduce. It's not clear enough. I think it depends who reads it, could misinterpret what's there. What I'm hearing is, now that it's clear on, these are the expectations, these are the consequences, which is part of the revisions, we could now hopefully not only get to some of the other pieces, have a safe setting, but also we will now avoid overusing suspensions for infractions that really shouldn't be suspendable infractions. That's how I now hear as I'm listening
That's
to
how I
both.
interpret
It kind of covers both to some degree, still with the understanding, to your point, the interventions that we're trying to do along with, I guess you call traditional, are still need to happen. But what we're saying is, if we're clear with this, these are the behaviors, which is now outlined in here, we now know these are suspendable, like 3As or 3Bs, but ones really aren't suspendable unless you start going through a progression, which is outlined in here. That's how I heard that. With that including of reducing, with the understanding that our goal is to reduce the overuse if we're clear on expectations and consequences.
On the amendment to the amendment, Mr. Farmer.
Oh, and I'm,
On the amendment to the amendment.
okay, thank you. So, thank you, Todd, because originally I was thinking, yes, the pink needs to stay, but move it down. But my question is, we only were not cited just for one suspension because a kid skipped a class, right? I mean, weren't our suspensions based on?
Well, it's
I'm going to stop. It's not, that's irrelevant to the amendment to the amendment at this point. It's not relevant to the amendment to the amendment. So, I mean, if you have a clarifying question, but that question, we're starting to go down someplace else.
Okay, I'll do a clarifying question. So does that same verbiage that the three of you just discussed, take care of the other overuse of suspensions for infractions that are not skipping once or being late to class twice?
That's what the code of conduct presentation was.
Right, so, but if we take this out, because I heard Jeremy say it's only because of skipping once that kids were suspended. That was what we were cited on.
No, he just gave an example.
He was using that as an example of we overreacted to a skipping in class.
Yeah.
So that was the example he was using. because Dr. Baker and Abby Tarana both said that that was one of our presentations as part of the new. code of
Sure,
conduct.
and that's kind of, I hear you guys talking about the school-to-prison pipeline and illiteracy being the number one factor, blah, blah, blah. So if kids are out of school because of suspension, then we're having the same issues in high school as we would be having, or in whatever, elementary, middle, or high, that we would be having in prison, yes? If the kids aren't in school because of too much suspensions,
I mean, if that's a statement, I'm not gonna let you ask put board members on the spot to make a, if you have a question or if that's your statement, that's fine, but I'm not gonna
All
let
right,
you put
I'm
Ms.
done.
Lake
I'm done.
on. Is there any other questions to the amendment, Just somebody, is there, do you need something clarified? I'm struggling right now with you, Mr. Farmer, in the sense that I don't know where you're trying to go.
well, I guess I just thanked Todd, because when I was looking at the pink, I thought, well, maybe this just needs to be moved down. And then when Mark talked about this being the overview, okay. But I think it's really important that we continue to focus in on the reduction of suspensions.
And that's in that resolution.
I understand that it's in there, but we are talking about removing, you're going to put it back in at the end, but I want to make sure that it's not just put there for the unusual suspensions, or the ones that shouldn't, the infractions that kids should not be suspended for. And is there something that we need to say a little bit more to make that clear? Because yeah, Mark, sorry, I don't mean to do that, but I think we're having a
You
discussion.
don't need to.
Okay. Is there any other questions or comments on this?
Go ahead.
Ms. Lake, yep, go ahead. On the amendment to
They
the
took-
amendment, please keep it on
Yes,
that.
yeah,
I'm trying to be
just
good.
in answer, I think they took exactly the language that
And
was in
moved
the
it.
pink and moved it down. So it didn't do anything to change what that meant.
Okay, so we're
Yeah, we
keeping
just
the
added
pink.
it in.
We're just
Yeah.
going to put the pink at the end of the yellow.
Just
And the
connecting.
yellow will be first, the first bullet.
Yeah.
Correct. That's the amendment to the amendment. All right, on the amendment to the amendment, are there any other questions? Seeing none, all those in favor of the amendment to the amendment, can I see a show of hands? All right, that passes 9-0. Back onto the original amendment as amended. Are there any questions on that now?
This is just the addition of the yellow content with the pink added to the end of it, correct? Or are we talking about both things now?
Well, the pink, the amendment is to remove the pink portion with the
But just
yellow
first-
that we just amended with that other stuff at the end, with that other pink stuff at the end of the yellow now.
Right, but we're not talking about Mark's second change.
We're not to that second change yet. We're doing one at a time because praise Jesus, we would have been down a rabbit hole I don't know I could have got out of. So we're just on the first one right now. So, is there any other questions on that? All right, so the amendment as amended to the code of conduct, all those in favor? That passes 9-0. Now, on to the second amendment to the code of conduct. Mr. Bonigorio, go ahead.
Okay, the second amendment is to remove the first sentence from section 4, or item number 4 of the section titled Beliefs About Children, Learning, and Discipline. And again, that states the use of out-of-school suspension as a response to challenging behavior does not improve school climate or outcomes for students. The rest of the passage remains intact. And I'm going to go back to the research, and one of the criticisms of Hattie's work is that they're meta-analyses. They take everything, throw it into the pot, and pull out with the results. One of the things that goes into that pot is what happens, do suspensions help students who are suspended academically and things like that? Maybe not. But what happens to the rest of the students? And the research does provide positive effects for cases, I'm just going to refer to a couple of examples, again, from Visible Learning, Hattie notes, if classes are to be in inviting places that are fair and safe and places where students are respected as learners, and this is regarding bullying, there is no place for bullying, no place. There is a negative correlation between achieving and being bullied. But this may mean that those with good academic achievement were less likely to have been exposed to bullying victimization. It goes on to cite other research that found being bullied was negatively related to achievement and school attendance. There's a logical conclusion in that. If you remove the sources of bullying, the rest of the class and the school environment is a more inviting and safe place. A second example that he uses is regarding disruptive behavior. And there he says the presence of disruptive students can have negative effects on their own and all other students' achievement outcomes. So their own achievement suffers and other students' achievement suffers. And he goes on to report that reducing disruption from classrooms has a very large 0.82 effect size on improving student outcomes. So reduce it somehow, but certainly removing the disruptive element from the classroom has a positive impact on the classroom. Again, maybe not on that student, and I would suggest that the research that says that that it doesn't help student outcome is primarily focused on the students who are being suspended.
Thank you, Mr. Barnagora. Mr. Butler?
So the research, I think, again, suggests here that, or it doesn't suggest, it says that suspensions, while intended to address student behavior, often negatively impact school climate and student well-being. So I think I can't imagine approving a code of conduct under the sections about what we believe and striking the section that says what we believe is that suspensions are damaging to student outcomes and well-being. There's a leap being made in the proposal that things like bullying, which nobody wants to see, and disruptive behavior, which nobody wants to see, are that the only solution to those things is suspension. That if that were to be true, if that were the case that was being made by anyone, then we would have a problem and something we'd need to change. But that's not the case that's being made here. The case that's being made is that we believe, as it says right now, that suspensions have a negative impact and should be avoided when they can. Doesn't mean we're not going to be suspending students. We will be continuing to suspend students. But I can't imagine not acknowledging what we know to be true and believe to be true, which is what is stated in the code of conduct right now.
Thank you, Mr. Butler. Any other comments or questions?
I can just add something that we started to talk, is that okay?
Sure.
So what I found when I was teaching is that if a disruptive child was taken out of the room for whatever that might look like, typically within the next week, few days, somebody else would rise up to fill that child's spot. We would find another kid who was with challenging behavior, so to speak, based on the other kid going. I don't have any scientific data, but as a classroom teacher and discussing with other teachers, that's what we would find over and over again. We'd take one out and somebody else would rise up. So this idea of suspending kids in the hope that it would bring stability and the ability to learn within that classroom when that kid's gone cannot stand on its own with just the suspension. There has to be other things that come into play to help that get better. You agree?
I do.
So how does that?
May I respond to that, Mr. McCabe?
Yep, it was directed to you.
I'll be brief. I don't think there's a conflict in that. I just see this as removing, I believe it is a belief statement. I don't think it is supported by the evidence. I've cited specific research, but it doesn't say that nowhere in any of this discussion has anyone argued that we should only be using suspensions. I'm endorsing the balanced approach that we're talking about. I just think we ought to remove a statement that on its face says, I mean, if we were to take this as what it seems to be saying and what Mr. Butler is arguing, I would say, let's get rid of suspensions. If suspensions are really that bad for the entire school climate, let's get rid of them. The research doesn't say that. I'm not arguing for that. I'm not arguing that it should be the only tool. No way. Of course not. So I don't think there's any conflict between what is currently the plan that's in the code of conduct and the very modest changes that we're looking at here. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bonagoro. Before I get to you, Mr. Butler, I just have a question for Mr. Bonagoro. I'm looking at the highlighted portion on 3, and I'm trying to figure out how students about them and will help them learn and grow. I'm struggling with how that makes sense, I guess, right now to me. Am I missing something someplace else? I mean, like the second half of that bullet, or did a piece of that bullet get cut out because it's just not?
That's a good question, Mr. McCabe.
These are subsections of this paragraph.
Oh, something's wrong here, yeah, after.
Oh, I see what
What's the
happened.
matter?
Okay. So there's a little bit of an error. So at the end of that, it should have been, when you remove students, it should be, if I'm reading the draft of the code of conduct, if anybody has it in front of them, Dr. Baker, if you have it, at the end there, it should say, students are more likely to do the right thing when they understand. So it was that first part that you took out on item 4, but in your printed copy, it's out. So I'm reading it, it didn't make sense.
Yeah.
But I see where your error was. So we're still just taking out that section.
Yes.
Right, correct?
Correct.
And then the rest will follow through with the current documentation. Okay? All right, Mrs. Farmer, I just wanted to clarify that because I was reading it and I was struggling with
Yes.
trying to get it to make sense, but.
Me too.
Okay,
Thank you.
all right.
Like the cut, yeah.
Ms. Lake,
I just think if every one of us thought back to a student that was in a class with us, and you thought, that class would have been so much better without that kid. Now, I'm not saying anything about suspensions, but when you say that to remove a very disruptive element from a classroom is not going to affect the climate, that doesn't even make sense to me. Of course it will. I mean, if you remove somebody who is disrupting your household, it will make a difference.
In the classroom.
That's all. In the
How
classroom
about
or,
the school?
yeah.
all right. We got too many individual conversations going on, so does anybody have any questions or comments? Mr. Butler?
So, I think we have to be clear about what the research actually says. The examples from the author that were being read earlier talked about the need for a calm classroom, the need for a calm learning environment in order for students to learn. 100% agree with that. That research does not say, so suspensions and removals should be utilized in order to achieve that. That was not something that was read in this meeting. The research on the impact on school climate and other students of suspension says that schools with high suspension rates are often perceived as less safe and welcoming by both students and teachers. It says that in schools with harsh discipline policies, even students not suspended may experience lower test scores and a less positive school climate. And a school climate focused on control and punishment can negatively impact the overall sense of safety and belonging for all students. Those are all university studies. So I think the research, we should not be unclear about what the research is saying about this. And I think and we should also not make leaps about what the research is not saying, that there's not a false equivalency between, that we shouldn't create a false equivalency between the desire for a calm classroom environment and the idea that suspensions help to create that.
Thank you, Mr. Butler. Are there any other questions or comments?
Can I make it?
Anna Maria, and then we'll go to Superintendent Smalling.
I think the presentation that we heard this evening really speaks to this wider lens. I think the Code of Conduct as written, I think, if I may take a moment to read what Mr. Bonagario was trying to articulate and what we've since, by looking at that little omission that I think clarifies, the climate is a product of many things that were introduced in our Code of Conduct. We are not using just one tool in our toolbox. The use of out-of-school suspension, I might suggest that we say the exclusive use of an out-of-school suspension as a response to challenging behaviors does not improve school climate or outcomes for students. Students are more likely to do the right thing when, and these are the bullets, they understand the positive behaviors that are expected of them. They feel that staff members care about them and will help them learn and grow. All school staff consistently use shared language and practices, and all staff provide recognition and feedback for behaving appropriately, making their best effort, and completing high-quality work. That is a description of our classroom. And I think to pull out just the suspension piece is really not accurate, right? It's all of these things, because I think it would lead to a great climate if all these things that we have in our Code of Conduct are being followed. So I think we're really focusing on one tiny piece of a much larger dynamic that happens in our classrooms regarding student behaviors. So I do think we can achieve a good climate, provided we are working with our students in many ways, and suspension being one of the tools in the toolbox, but not the only one. So I would suggest, if we were to make an amendment, the exclusive use of out-of-school suspension as a response does not improve school climate, because I think that's where we were perhaps having that conversation, and I just offer that for your consideration.
So are you amending?
Amending the amendment.
You're amending, it's. Because he's removing, let me just think this through for a second before I decide. I think I'm gonna have to rule the amendment out of order because it changes the original motion, the original amendment too greatly, because you remove that whole section, you're putting the whole section back and adding a word, so I think it totally changes the amendment. I don't think it's an appropriate amendment at the end of the day.
Okay, no problem. I just wanted to add my clarifying comment.
Yep,
That's all I was
nope, and
looking
that's
for.
good, okay. Any other comments, questions, or concerns? Oh, Superintendent Smalling,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I think what makes this whole conversation difficult is that the document itself, like this section, when it was created through a committee of people that, when they set this out years ago, they said, these are our beliefs at that time. I do think there's revisions, because this was put together 2012, right? And there's been slowly revisions throughout that. But I think what always makes these conversations hard is that when you look at this section you almost got to look at the section as a whole before you could start picking apart what goes in and what goes out, because when it was put together at that time, it's a committee of people that I'm assuming back in 2012 did research, looked at different, and then tried to come out with, here's our beliefs at that time, and they created that. So what's difficult is, I think everything that everybody's saying are logical, like things that we should consider, but we're trying to make small changes to a larger process where people researched, had discussions, worked on that language that fit that, the bigger picture here. So it's really hard to amend one keep the others because it was all done as a bigger, a bigger process that flowed in. So it's hard to like change this for that. Not saying any are right or wrong, but without the bigger process, we're just nitpicking words versus really trying to get at what I think what you're saying, Mark, is are we all clear on our beliefs about discipline, and are we, like, do we have a unanimous or common collective understanding to operate of, which is what that was done when it was initially put in, and now through time, there needs to be some changes. So I just think what we're all gonna struggle with here is how do you actually get to exactly what needs to be there when we're doing it just out of the context of a larger committee that's reading, researching, having discussion, wordsmithing, and all that work, so that it gets out initially what you're looking for and everybody's here, because I think we're all looking for the same thing. But I just think it's hard to do one tiny section in a whole section that is our beliefs about children learning and discipline. It's just hard to do that with a few of us versus trying to go through a process that would be, yeah, this all makes sense to us. So I think that's the struggle that we're getting, that you're in here right now, because, her suggestion was a great suggestion. All these suggestions are good, so how do you do that? And typically in a committee, it's through a process and wordsmithing and in and out and feedback. So I'm only putting that out there because I think it's going to be really difficult to get to the final piece with so many different viewpoints here that are all valid.
I just have a question.
Okay.
Do you know if this came out of, and a lot flows together in my brain, out of like the NYU, when NYU was here do you remember if this is where that came from at that?
No, it was prior to.
It was prior to-
So when these came in, when these changes were made, they were just before, we're in like our MTSS PBIS learning phase, and it was prior to we went through the TAC-D restorative learning phase. So these changes, if my memory serves, was prior to that.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's been in there a lot.
But it's been, and it hasn't been touched since
Yeah.
in either way.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Ms. Farmer?
Thank you. Yes, to your question, because I started on the board when TAC-D came in, and I think that was 2016 maybe, so. And I have to agree with you, Jeremy, and I think why I was scrambling, because I'm like, how are we fitting this into here? And when I look at the beginning of the document in the first column, everything is there. So yes, I appreciate what you said. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? All right, on the Second Amendment, then we're gonna vote. I guess we'll do a roll call vote on this, because I have no way or idea where this is gonna go. So we'll start with, since it's Mr. Bonagorio's resolution, we'll start with Mr. Bonagorio.
Am I allowed to make a comment?
Since it's a roll call, correct?
I will just make a final reference to the research data, which when you do a correlational research, look for relationships between a school or a district with serious behavioral problems, there will be automatically a correlation, a high correlation between suspensions and behaviors. They go hand in hand. It's not necessarily causal. Correlation does not imply causality is the famous dictum of statistical research. So we would expect to see that correlation there. I vote yes for the amendment.
And just to clarify for everyone, when you speak, it's to explain your vote. I'm gonna give you the leeway there, Mr. Bonagorio, but it's just to explain your vote. Mr. Maloney?
I'll vote with Mr. Bonadorio, yes.
Ms. Seaman?
No.
Mr. Butler?
Because I think we've got because I'm voting no on the basis of the research that does show causation between suspension and all these negative impacts on climate and student outcomes.
Ms. Farmer?
I too am voting no, based on school to prison pipeline, the fact that kids aren't learning when they're not in school, and based on what Jeremy said regarding this being a smaller piece of a whole.
Ms. Lake?
Yes.
Mrs. Falzarano?
No. No.
Gotcha. Mr. Vice President Stansel?
Yes.
And I'm just going to say something before I explain my vote. Research. Everybody's citing research tonight. And research, I can find research that says Bigfoot exists. I can find research that says Bigfoot doesn't exist. I think we end up in a very slippery slope as a Board of Education when any of us start citing research, because anybody can find anything on the opposite side of the spectrum. So I think we have to be careful with that. And it seems like tonight we got bogged down a little bit in the research component of differing opinions, because you can always find something to support your argument. So I just want us to be careful with that moving forward. I am going to vote in favor of this. I do think that it's difficult for me to comprehend how suspending a student, for that student, it doesn't improve their climate, it doesn't assist their outcome. However, I do think if you're a disruptive, I mean, I agree with Ms. Lake on this, I think if you're a disruptive student, and that student now is out of the school setting, out of the classroom, et cetera, it does improve for those students or for those buildings. Sometimes kids, we suspend, we LTS kids. I mean, we did a hearing this evening where a student was out for a while out of school because of egregious actions. And I think at times that does help improve the school environment, because if a student would have come back sooner, we could have been right back to square one and in that battle, in that physical altercation again. So that doesn't help the school environment. So I am going to vote in favor of this. I think taking that line out, the use of school suspension, I just think it's a philosophical belief, and we all have our own philosophical beliefs, but I don't necessarily know if this belongs in the code of conduct, so I'm going to vote yes. Motion to amend the code of conduct passes 5-4. And with that, I'm going to take a point of personal privilege. I'm going to wish our superintendent a happy 50th birthday this week. You know, he looks good for 50.
All right.
I mean, I wanted to put him a day over 60, so he's looking good. But I want to wish him a happy birthday on behalf of myself and the rest of the Board of Education. With that, Mr. Maloney?
I'd like to pass the amendment to end this meeting.
All right, it's not going to be an amendment. We're not going to do that, so. But is there a second? Vice President Stansel, thank you, everyone. Everybody votes in favor, I assume. Nobody ever votes no on the
Nobody ever-
ending the meeting. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
You caught me off guard.